Welcome to Pegasus Auto Racing. I'm Zach Moore on Techline, and today we're going to talk to you guys about turbos, specifically TurboSmart. That's the brand that we carry. We're going to go off the deep end because this is something that I went off the deep end on myself a couple of years ago. That's kind of where all my knowledge came from on this. So if anything is wrong, feel free to let me know. But as far as I can tell, I've gone pretty in depth on this, and this is something that's always really brought a lot of joy to my life. So we're going to start off with wastegates. Right here we have a WG60 or a 60 mil wastegate and a 38. This would be a traditional 38. You can tell because it has the 2-bolt flanges versus the WG60 has pretty massive V-bands on it. Those 2-bolt flanges are a pretty standardized bolt pattern. Pretty much any run-of-the-mill 38 mil wastegate is going to have pretty much that setup, that mounting style. So you can take off whatever knockoff version you have and put on this TurboSmart one. Probably have better use case out of it. But anyhow, to continue on, the reason that these are so drastically different is this is what you're using to control your boost ultimately for the most part. There are some pretty wild technologies coming out these days that are a little bit more impressive and have a much different style of controlling boost, but traditionally people use a wastegate to do that. The reason that they use a wastegate is it actually stops, or I shouldn't say stops, it diverts the air away from going into the turbine side of the turbo. The reason you want to do that is the turbine side is what actually spins the turbo shaft. That's what helps make the boost. That's what gets the shaft speed up. If you divert the air away from it, you slow down the shaft because it just doesn't have the energy, the force to go behind it. So the reason that these are so drastically different in size is sometimes you have to divert a lot of air away. An engine is basically a really fancy, very complex air pump. It's really all it is. Turbos just make it a really efficient air pump. So if we have something that's already really efficient and already creates a lot of volume and you want to put a turbo on it, chances are you can't multiply that efficiency a ton, meaning you can't run a huge number of boost on something that isn't designed to run a lot of boost. So when you do that, you're probably going to use a really low boost number, whether it's 2 psi, 6 psi, 10 psi. In the world of boost, a lot of those are kind of lower numbers. And what that means is the engine will typically make a lot of airflow without needing a lot of that boost. So you have to divert a lot of air away from the wastegate. And we're actually going to be talking a lot about boost control because that's pretty much the whole name of the game with turbo stuff. So using different size wastegates is the key thing, and making sure that you have an appropriately sized wastegate is very key to making sure that your system is going to function properly. If you have a wastegate that's too small, you're going to have boost creep. You're going to try and target, 4 psi, 10 psi of boost, and you'll get 2 more than that, 3 more than that, 5 more than that. There are different things that can cause that boost creep, but as long as your plumbing is pretty good and you are making sure that the wastegate is actually getting priority, typically that's a good sign of the wastegate's just too small. There are companies out there that do have, they call them match bots, that will help you size a wastegate properly for the given turbo, the given engine, and how much boost you're trying to run. All that being said, wastegates are relatively easy to swap out for a bigger or a little size. The other thing that might happen is you may have too large of a wastegate. If you have too large of a wastegate, you're actually going to dump a lot more air than you need to, and you're going to have trouble controlling the boost to a finite level. The reason is when this valve opens, this is a big valve that's opening up and letting a lot of air out. And if you let out too much air, you can actually reduce the energy that's going into the turbo a lot more than you're planning on. The reason that is an issue is it can cause kind of boost surges and issues with not being able to control the boost exactly how you want to, how smoothly you want to, and all that is really a problem. That's the hot side of things. Turbos are two sides. So it is one unit, but it's two completely separate sides. There's the hot side and the cold side. We just went over controlling boost on the hot side and making sure that that's all good. Making sure that we have it on the cold side, though, is just as important. In stuff that has a throttle blade, 90%, 99% of your typical automotive gas engines these days still use a throttle blade. And the tricky part with throttle blades is when the throttle blade closes, because you just let off the throttle, the turbo doesn't just magically stop. This is not really what happens. What really happens is the turbo is still making all the volume. It's the shaft is still spinning. It's still creating all that boost pressure. And when you shut down that throttle plate, you have all this boost pressure that's trying to get into the engine, but there's nowhere for it to go. What we do to combat that is we use a blow-off valve. This is what makes all that fun noises that everyone loves about turbo stuff. This is really what kind of saves a lot of stuff. The reasoning is when that air hits that throttle plate, it sends a pressure wave right back to the turbo because it just had this massive shock and change in what the pressure load that it's trying to get. So the blow-off valve relieves all that pressure. There's a little valve in here and it plunges, and what happens is the air comes out through the sides. This would be an atmospheric blow-off valve. You use that to just evacuate the air as quickly as possible. A bigger one is going to evacuate more air, a smaller one is going to evacuate less air. TurboSmart also has what they call their compact series. And the nice thing about this is it's also a recirculation valve. So instead of just blowing off to the atmosphere, which it can still do, it also recirculates it back into the intake tract. That's really good for stuff that's using a MAF, mass airflow sensor. It's needed because the engine already measured that air volume. The other thing that this works really well is if you're trying to be more subtle, it's a street car. You aren't trying to burn the town down or anything like that. You're just trying to get to work. This recirculation valve helps to keep the noise down. You don't get that noise or anything like that. You don't have any of that. So it does help to keep your neighbors a little bit happier with you, just to help keep the noise down. So that's basic boost control on the cold side. Additionally, the other circuit that's really important with turbos is oiling. We actually use, TurboSmart has an oil pressure regulator. This would thread into the inlet port. It's designed, actually the inlet port is over here. This is the inlet port. So it would thread into the inlet port, and this is just designed to keep a steady oil pressure. Turbos don't need 100 psi of oil pressure, but they need more than 10. So you really need to make sure that you have good oil pressure going into that feed, but you don't necessarily always need this massive influx of oil. A little bit of oil is all it needs, just proper oil pressure, but maintaining that pressure is really critical to making sure that the turbo stays happy and healthy. So that's TurboSmart's solution. On top of that, you also have the drain side. Making sure that the oil is draining from the turbo center section is really critical. If you have that starting to back up, or if the drain size is too small, or if it's not routing to a place where it can naturally gravity feed drain well, you can have issues where the turbo oil actually back up the drain. And when that happens, you typically blow out seals, you have other issues. To combat that, we do sell scavenge pumps that work really well. You would put it in the drain, and then you can pump it anywhere. You can pump it back up to the engine, you can pump it into the oil pan. It doesn't really matter, it's using pressure to pump it. So that works really, really well to making sure that the turbo oil drain side is really happy. Lastly, and this is just before we get into turbos, that is, we also have the electronic boost control. This is TurboSmart's black box. This is an electronic boost controller. It's nice because you can control turbo ramping, you can control the wastegates really well with this, especially electronic wastegates. You can control a MAC valve with this. This does a really, really good job of making sure that you have proper boost control exactly where you want it all the time. We also have just a traditional manual boost controller. You know, it's just a clicky knob, right? That's all it is. It's just, you want more boost, you dial in more. You want less boost, you dial it out. There's nothing really critical or earth-shattering about that. TurboSmart just makes a really good one. So that's all the auxiliary components, minus all the plumbing, which there's a lot of. That's all the auxiliary components, so all the stuff that's controlling the boost, making sure that the engine's happy. This is the menace that causes all the problems. This is the turbo. This is what you're really loving with. So sizing a turbo is really, really critical. Making sure that you have it sized big enough that it meets your power levels, that you're staying in the efficiency window of the compressor housing. All of that is really critical, but not using a turbo that's so big that you can never spool it. Your boost response is really bad. You don't want anything like that. You can really, really go off the deep end, really trying to finely tune exactly how you want to set up your turbo. You can also get different ARs. So this is the turbine housing. This whole turbo comes apart. You can take off just the turbine housing. This is a 0.82 AR. There's also there's 1.0 ARs, 1.16 ARs. There's even 0.6. That's the air ratio of the turbine housing. That's really important because that kind of changes how quickly the air that's coming in tries to spool that turbo and spin that blade. Having a bigger or a smaller housing also does the same thing. This particular turbo is a 6262, meaning both the inducer and the exducer are 72 mil. Basically, the inlet and the outlet's a 62. The other things to note is this does actually have an anti-surge. That's this kind of gap right in the middle here. Otherwise, turbo technology has really come a long way, but as far as earth-shattering information that we need to talk about right now, there isn't a whole lot that's changed. Air comes in, air comes out, boost goes out. It's really kind of basic, but the little intricacies of different turbos and different brands and all that really changes stuff. We can get into the pitch and the blades and the makeup of the compressor wheel itself. You could have a billet wheel, you could be a cast wheel. There's all sorts of different little intricacies, but ultimately you're looking for a proper turbo that's sized exactly for what you need. Things that change that are RPM limit, where you want to set your red line. Cam size. If you have a really, really, really big cam and you want a turbo that's going to come in sooner, it's probably going to take a smaller turbo to do that, just because down low that engine's not making all that volume that you would normally with a very mild cam. You can get into different style inlets and outlets for the drains, or for the oil, I should say. T6 housings, T4 housings, T3 housings for the little stuff, V-band inlets and outlets. There's really, it's never ending with turbo stuff, and it's really impressive. They also typically, at least with TurboSmart, they'll come with the V-bands, the weld flanges. So it's really everything that you need to start. But it's a process. If you've never done it, and if you're watching this video, I'm assuming you probably haven't. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot of information right off the bat, but it's more daunting than it really needs to be. But that being said, this has already been a long video just on little basic intricacies. So, there's always more information that you can get. You can always contact us here at Pegasus Auto Racing, and we're happy to give you as much information as we can, help you out. We also have silicone couplers that really tie in all the rest of this. So whenever you can, get a turbo. It's great.